Pakistan just poured 2 months of intense diplomatic effort into what many called the most critical ceasefire effort in the world right now. Iran's reply was calculated and layered. They quietly passed a detailed 14-point plan through Pakistani channels, yet their officials stood in front of cameras and flatly denied any negotiations were happening. The nation at the center of the conversation refuses to admit it's even participating. Meanwhile, the country everyone expects to steer things behind the scenes, China, has stayed completely quiet. That deliberate silence tells the real story here. If you want to grasp why these discussions were probably set up to collapse from day one, and what Beijing is truly pursuing while saying nothing, stick with this analysis. We examine the deeper patterns, the full strategic board, not just the surface moves. Today, we break down Iran's calculated rejection of open talks and China's masterful quiet role in this high-stakes game. Let me paint the full picture for you. Back on February 28, 2026, American and Israeli forces launched a series of coordinated precision strikes against Iranian targets. The goals were clear: cripple Iran's nuclear ambitions and dismantle its network of regional allies and proxies. For over a month, waves of attacks hit missile bases, radar networks, leadership centers, and weapons depots mainly in western and southwestern regions. Then on April 8th, a temporary ceasefire kicked in. But let's be honest, a ceasefire is never real peace. It's merely a tactical breather, a short window between rounds of conflict rather than a genuine fix for the underlying tensions that sparked everything. Just days later, on April 11th and 12th, the initial negotiation session started in Islamabad under Pakistan's facilitation. They fell apart almost immediately. American officials, including Vice President Vance, stated openly that Iran had rejected the core conditions. Iran's public messaging, repeated consistently by their foreign ministry, insists they are not engaging directly with Washington at all. Yet here's the crucial detail that changes everything. While denying talks publicly, Iran delivered a comprehensive 14-point framework through back channels via Pakistani diplomats. They responded to American proposals indirectly, and senior figures like their parliament speaker made personal trips to Islamabad for face-to-face coordination. On paper, Iran claims zero interest in dialogue. In practice, they're deeply involved through a setup that allows them total deniability. This isn't confusion or inconsistency. It's a deliberate tactic, and once you see it clearly, the entire situation looks very different. The core issue becomes obvious. If Iran truly wants no part of negotiations, why invest so much energy in crafting detailed proposals and rooting them carefully? The answer points directly toward bigger powers shaping the environment, especially Beijing. Let's examine the specific elements Iran put forward in that 14-point document because the substance reveals their real strategy. They insisted on a complete and permanent halt to all military actions within 30 days. Not a fragile pause that could be reversed, but a binding end that removes any legal justification for future strikes. They also called for the full pullback of American military assets from zones they consider their extended security boundary. This isn't just about immediate borders. It covers a wide operational area where U.S. forces project power. Third, they demanded an immediate end to the naval blockade that had sealed their ports since mid-April, choking off oil exports and commercial shipping. Fourth, the unfreezing of billions in Iranian assets locked away under sanctions. Fifth, substantial financial compensation for all the damage from the recent bombing campaign. Sixth, formal international recognition of Iran's control and authority over the Strait of Hormuz, which would hand Tehran enormous influence over global energy flows. And the most non-negotiable item, nuclear matters are completely off the table. No discussion, no compromises, no pauses on enrichment. This is their red line. On the other side, the American position was equally firm, but focused on reversing Iran's nuclear progress through diplomacy, what strikes couldn't fully achieve. Washington pushed for a 20-year ban on uranium enrichment activities. They wanted Iran to hand over around 400 kilograms of enriched material at 60% purity, material that could quickly become weapons grade. Complete dismantling of the major sites at Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow. Only one limited facility allowed to operate under strict international oversight with zero enrichment capability, and full transfer of all existing enriched uranium stockpiles. In short, America wanted Iran to gut its entire nuclear program first before any relief on sanctions, assets, or the blockade. These aren't flexible bargaining chips. They're structured to achieve strategic neutralization, You can see the fundamental clash here. Iran demands an end to pressure and economic strangulation before any nuclear conversation. The United States insists on nuclear concessions as the prerequisite for easing that pressure. These aren't minor differences in details. They're completely opposing views on the sequence of reality itself. One side says remove the boot from our neck first. The other says prove you're harmless before we lift the boot. This deadlock is precisely why Pakistan finds itself in an impossible position, trying to connect two frameworks that fundamentally contradict each other on basic order and priorities. This situation echoes historical patterns we've seen before. Think back to the Vietnam-era negotiations in Paris. North Vietnam publicly projected total rejection and defiance, while privately using intermediaries to drag things out. They weren't seeking quick peace. They were buying crucial time to rebuild forces, shift public opinion in America, and prepare major offensives. The talks served as cover for military reconstitution. Many analysts believe something similar is unfolding now. During this so-called ceasefire, Iran has reportedly rebuilt 30 out of 33 key missile positions near the Strait of Hormuz and restored stockpiles to about 70% of pre-conflict levels. They're not winding down. They're accelerating recovery. When a side that publicly dismisses talks still engages privately, it's often about gaining time, not finding resolution. Pakistan is feeling this tension acutely. Senior officials, including interior ministers and the army chief, have made multiple urgent trips to Tehran in quick succession. This isn't relaxed confidence, it's urgent damage control. Pakistan's value in this crisis depends entirely on remaining the trusted bridge between both sides. If that bridge loses relevance, Pakistan risks becoming a powerless observer to chaos right on its border. Analysts close to the situation warn that the mediator could soon be sidelined entirely, removing the last real restraint on renewed fighting. While all this frantic activity happens, China has maintained radio silence. And that absence of comment is perhaps the most telling signal of all. During recent high-level meetings in Beijing, an American delegation, including top cabinet officials and major business leaders, pushed hard for China to use its leverage to help open the Strait of Hormuz and ease tensions. The public statements were vague and non-committal, basically agreeing that trade routes should stay open without offering any concrete actions or pressure on Iran. In reality, China has taken steps that quietly favor Tehran. Chinese companies have continued purchasing Iranian oil, bypassing American sanctions where possible. Beijing has publicly attributed the conflict's origins mainly to U.S. actions rather than shared responsibility. Iranian diplomats coordinated closely with Chinese counterparts right before the American summit, aligning messages in advance. China isn't staying out because it lacks influence. It's staying quiet as a deliberate strategy. Public pressure on Iran would damage Beijing's image as a reliable counterweight to Washington and weaken alliances like BRICS. Open military or economic guarantees could invite direct retaliation and complicate other priorities like Taiwan. Silence allows Iranian oil to keep flowing, maintains coalition unity, and avoids costly escalation that could hurt Chinese and even American economies. It's the position of strength when others are forced to show their cards. Looking ahead, the risks are mounting. Missile sites are being restored rapidly. Target lists for potential renewed strikes are ready, now potentially including economic infrastructure like refineries and ports. Proxy incidents, such as drone attacks near key facilities in the region, show the gray zone conflict is already simmering. Public statements from American leadership suggest deadlines are approaching. The mediation window through Pakistan appears fragile and likely to close soon. Alternative venues like Oman or Qatar carry different balances that Iran may find less favorable, potentially incentivizing them to let the current process fail rather than compromise. At its core, this standoff revolves around incompatible survival approaches. The naval blockade gives America leverage, while control over the strait gives Iran its own. Neither wants to blink first. History shows that when fundamental sequencing cannot be reconciled, temporary pauses rarely last. The structural forces point toward renewed pressure rather than breakthrough. We watch these developments closely because the board is shifting, and the next moves will reshape energy markets, alliances, and security across multiple regions for years to come. The real drivers are rarely the loudest voices. They hide in the gaps between public statements and private actions. Understanding those patterns is how we stay ahead of the headlines. Pakistan's mediation effort now hangs by a thread, and the consequences of its failure could echo far beyond the region. What comes next isn't just another round of meetings in a different capital. It's a dangerous transition into uncharted escalation territory. Oman has already begun quiet technical discussions focused narrowly on safe navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. Qatar stands ready as a backup venue, but shifting from Islamabad to Muscat represents more than a change of scenery. Pakistan carries a unique position as a Muslim-majority nation with credible ties to both Tehran and Washington. Oman, while respected, leans closer to Western security arrangements and long-standing military partnerships with the United States. Iran recognizes this imbalance perfectly. That means Tehran has strong reasons to either salvage the Pakistan channel at all costs or quietly ensure that no mediator succeeds because a total breakdown removes the final brake on renewed conflict. Let's dig deeper into the incompatible foundations that make compromise so difficult. For Iran, lifting the naval blockade is not a concession. It's a matter of national survival. Once oil tankers can move freely again, revenue begins flowing back into their economy. That money funds reconstruction, strengthens proxy networks, and reduces America's coercive power at the negotiating table. The blockade remains Washington's strongest card. Without it, the leverage to force nuclear concessions melts away. Both sides have built their entire strategy around refusing to move first. Iran says end the pressure, then we'll discuss our program. America says dismantle the program, then we'll ease the pressure. These are not negotiable preferences. These are existential red lines. When two parties define reality in completely opposite orders, talking becomes theater rather than problem solving. This brings us to the most dangerous phase ahead. Iranian missile restoration along the strait has reached critical momentum. Stockpiles are climbing steadily. On the other side, Pentagon planners have updated target packages that now extend beyond military installations into energy infrastructure, power generation, and port facilities. A new round of strikes would not be limited or symbolic. They would aim to create lasting economic pain. We have already seen the warning signs in the gray zone. A drone attack near the Baraka nuclear facility in the UAE. Saudi Arabia intercepting multiple drones originating from Iraqi airspace. These are not random incidents. They represent calibrated pressure through proxies designed to maintain deniability while testing resolve. The ceasefire was never a peace agreement. It was a temporary suspension, and that suspension is rapidly losing its meaning. President Trump's recent public messaging has added urgency to the timeline. Statements emphasizing that time is running out and that options are narrowing send a clear signal to both allies and adversaries. National security meetings are happening at the highest levels, involving key figures shaping America's response. The window for diplomacy is narrowing fast. If Pakistan's channel collapses completely, which appears increasingly likely, the question becomes who fills the vacuum and whether anyone can. China's continued silence during all of this remains the masterstroke in their strategic playbook. Beijing has refused to apply meaningful pressure on Iran, despite American requests during high-level summits. Instead, Chinese entities continue processing Iranian crude through workarounds that skirt sanctions. Public statements have consistently placed primary blame on Washington for the outbreak of hostilities. Coordination between Chinese and Iranian officials happened immediately before major American visits, ensuring aligned positions. This is not neutrality. This is calculated alignment through inaction. By staying quiet, China protects its image as the leader of a non-Western bloc, keeps energy supplies somewhat stable, and avoids triggering direct economic retaliation that could hurt its own growth or global supply chains. Silence costs them almost nothing right now, while every other player is forced to reveal their hand. Yet even China's patience has limits. Should the strait face prolonged closure that begins disrupting their massive energy imports at scale, Beijing may eventually adjust. For now, their strategic reserves and alternative routes through Russia provide enough buffer. This waiting game favors the patient power. Looking at possible outcomes, several scenarios stand out. The most probable near-term path is a gradual collapse of the ceasefire followed by targeted American and Israeli strikes aimed at degrading Iran's rebuilt missile capacity and economic assets. Iran would respond through its network of proxies across Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and beyond, creating multiple flashpoints that stretch Western resources. Energy prices would spike dramatically, sending ripples through global markets. Pakistan could face massive refugee flows, border instability, and pressure from both sides to pick a lane. China would likely continue its behind-the-scenes support for Iran while publicly calling for restraint. A less likely but possible breakthrough would require one side to accept a face-saving formula, perhaps involving limited nuclear inspections in exchange for partial sanctions relief and a phased blockade easing. However, given the deep mistrust and domestic political pressures on both leaderships, this path appears narrow and difficult to sustain. The wild card remains the human element. Miscalculation in the fog of proxy attacks, a single strike going too far, or domestic unrest inside Iran forcing harder-line responses could accelerate everything unexpectedly. History reminds us that wars often begin not because anyone truly wants them, but because the structures and incentives make de-escalation more costly than continuation. What this entire episode reveals is a shifting global order. Traditional American dominance in the Middle East is being challenged by determined regional actors backed by quiet great power enablers. Alliances like BRICS are showing their practical value, not through loud confrontation, but through strategic patience. Pakistan finds itself caught in the middle, its importance tied to a mediation role that may soon expire. The United States must decide whether renewed military action delivers lasting results or simply creates new cycles of resistance. For viewers trying to make sense of the daily headlines, the key is always to look past the statements and study the actual movements on the board. Where are the missiles being repaired? Which tankers are still moving? Who is meeting whom in private? Those patterns tell the truth that press conferences try to obscure. The coming weeks will likely decide whether this ceasefire becomes a footnote before larger conflict or a rare moment of genuine de-escalation. Right now, the structural forces lean heavily toward the former. The mediator is exhausted. The silent player holds the strongest position. And the core issues remain as divided as they were on day one. Stay sharp, question the surface narrative, and keep analyzing the real incentives driving each actor. The world doesn't move on slogans. It moves on power, timing, and the willingness to outlast your opponent. This story is far from over, and the next chapter could reshape energy security and international alliances for the next decade. Keep watching closely. The board never lies.